as you mentioned, and I quote, plastic remains intact. I mean, if we are able to just realize that we will not be here, but that plastic that we throw today or we use in our agriculture practices, or we get the food and packaging, it will stay. Even our generations will see that packaging.
The unique thing about plastics used in agricultural production, so the mulching films, greenhouse films, irrigation, is that at their end of life, they end up as large quantities in rural environments, away from the infrastructure associated with waste management in cities. Um, they are the responsibility of a farmer, so he's generally working by himself or with only a few support. So managing that waste is difficult, and it's very easy for that waste to end up either being openly burnt or just dumped in the countryside, dumped inappropriately on a dump site.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Planet vs. Plastics podcast series brought to you by the Network India. I'm Rumit, Walia, your host for this insightful journey into a world free from plastic pollution. In our fourth episode, we're going to be talking about agriculture versus plastics, the food that we get, the crops that we see around. It's all affected by the plastic pollution. And to talk about this, we have with us Miss Richard Thompson, who is an independent consultant. And let's talk about how this intersection is very crucial for all our lives. But before we dive in, here's a quick reminder. The views expressed here are for general informational purposes, and we encourage you to do your own research. We're here to spark ideas, inspire change, and navigate the complexities of plastic pollution. So, welcome, Mr. Richard. It's so good to have you. I've been seeing your webinars, and it's so amazing to have you in our podcast. So, why don't you introduce yourself for the audience and also tell about this intersection, which is very cool, agriculture versus plastics. So, what do you think when we talk about agriculture versus plastics?
Okay, well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I hope I can contribute to expanding the global understanding of the intersection of plastics and agriculture. So first about me, my background is in hazardous waste and chemicals. I have worked for 20 years with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, primarily related to the reduction of risks from pesticides. But in my latter years with the organization, I was instrumental on working on plastics used in agriculture. Since I retired from the organization in 2017, I was working as an independent consultant, also working for FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. And I was a co-author of two important reports that they produced in that time. The first was the global assessment of soil pollution, which covered plastics, inputs of plastics into agricultural soils. And also a report in December 21 on the assessment of agricultural plastics and their sustainability, a call for action. And it was that report that produced traction and raised the awareness of the potential issues of plastics used in agriculture. So that's me. Your question is the intersection between plastics and agriculture, and the term is versus. I think it's very nuanced. It's not all negative. Plastics have adverse impacts, but there are reasons for their use. So let's have a look at what plastics are used in agriculture and the potential problems. There are basically two sources of plastic pollution in agriculture. The first coming from intentionally used products and their misuse, both during use and at end of life. And those sorts of products would be mulching films, drip irrigation, greenhouse films, silage films, that sort of thing, plant support twines, which are all non-packaging plastics. But then agriculture also uses inputs that require packaging. So you end up with empty pesticide containers, fertilizer bags, animal feeds, and that sort of thing. So all those are intentionally used products. And in the report that I mentioned, the assessment of agricultural plastics, we identified that in terrestrial agriculture, there are about 10 million tons of those products used
Oh,
annually
wow.
around the globe. Fisheries account for another 2.5 million, 2.1 million tons, and there's a small quantity used in forestry. So that's all intentionally used products that potentially have impacts on the environment if they're not managed properly. And then there are unintentional releases of plastics into agriculture from agricultural practices. And this tends to be from the use of sewage sludge as a fertilizer. So this is using the nutrients in coming from wastewater treatment plants, very valuable commodity, but it has contamination. Microplastics from the washing of synthetic clothing, that sort of thing. It also comes with other contaminants like antimicrobial resistant
Yeah.
products, forever chemicals like PFAS. So using that is the sewage sludge as a fertilizer has its real benefits in terms of recycling the nutrients, but it's a potential vector for passing harmful contaminants to soils. So as I said, it's a nuanced relationship, plastics and agriculture. They provide tremendous benefits, but they also disbenefits, which we can explore further in this podcast.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a very good aspect of seeing plastics nowadays, because a lot of we have had this story of King Midas where people actually think that, oh, everything he touch will turn into a gold and it's a miracle, but soon he realized that it's not getting good. He don't have food to it. So plastic came in with the same intention. Everybody thought it's going to change the world, and now when we have problems, we are realizing it's, and what people don't realize nowadays, that everything is connected, from our homes, the packaging, the things that we use, the food in which we get these plastics, it all going down to the rivers, to the soil, and again coming back to us through this crop. In fisheries, I mean, there's a very famous saying that you will find more plastic in the ocean than the fish very soon. And so there is a meme going on that one lady goes to a shopkeeper and asks for fish, and then she says, can you put it in the plastic bag? And then the shopkeeper says, oh, plastic is already inside the fish. So that is the kind of plastic around us nowadays. So my next question, Dr. Richard, would be that from your vast experience, as you said, with the reports with the UN, I also read some reports where it has been mentioned that plastic is very good in terms of when we say irrigation and pipes and PVCs and everything. So where do you say that the farmers, when you go, when people go to them aware about this situation, how is that turning out? I mean, are they really aware what types of plastics they shouldn't actually buy for the irrigation, which can degrade the soil, or they are just, I mean, doing it whatever has been provided by the industries?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. In terms of the regulations of the products that are coming onto the market, at the moment it's very few. Only few countries have started developing standards, and so there's generally a lack of awareness of what is a good product and what is a bad, and that there's a general lack of awareness of how they can be used sustainably. Um, so work that is being done on the international level can help. So you're probably aware that there are two initiatives going on at the moment. So the world is currently negotiating a new international legally binding instrument against plastic pollution. And that is happening now with the next negotiating committee happening in April in Ottawa in Canada. And that will set out obligations on countries to control plastic pollution across all the sectors, both from, it will include agriculture, and it will include
Yeah.
both agricultural production, but and also downstream through the value chain for packaging that is picked up in the supermarkets. That is going on, but another intervention at the global level is that the Food and Agriculture Organization, partially, primarily as a result of the report that we published back in December 21, is now negotiating the development of a international voluntary code of conduct on the sustainable use of plastics in agriculture.
Oh,
And
wow.
okay, that should go further, and that the aim of that code of conduct will be to provide best practice recommendations for all actors in the supply chain, so governments, industry, farmers, distributors, waste managers, about how the materials can be managed more safely. And that should cover both the design of the products and what standards the products should meet, and how they can get into the market. And so that should stop some of the problems that have been identified. For example, in China, they were using very thin mulching films for their cotton production, and they were finding at the end of the harvest, these films were so weak because they were so thin that they had to be plowed into the soil. And eventually, after many years of doing that, the burden of plastic in the soil reached such an extent that it was actually harming the fertility of that soil. So,
Oh,
setting a standard for the minimum thickness of mulching films to allow them to be retrieved from the fields at the end of the season, it would be an important standard, and it's one of the reasons why now organizations are moving towards producing biodegradable mulching. But again, standards need to be developed for that, because many of these films, they don't just contain polymers, they contain other chemicals. And there's potential for the other chemicals and the degradation products of the biodegradable plastics to have some adverse effects. So all those things that they're being investigated by the scientific community at the moment, and standards would have to be developed. So it's a question of regulation, licensing of farmers, licensing of products, ensuring that farmers have access to adequate knowledge how to use the products, and also all the ancillary equipment that's required for their safe use and for their safe and complete extraction from the soil at the end of life. Um, there is another aspect. Some products are used durably. Greenhouse films. Now they have a life of about 4 years, when all their properties for light dispersal, anti-condensation, and that sort of thing, that's when they're effective. Those properties decrease, but the plastic remains intact. So there is a potential
hmm.
for farmers to continue to use these products beyond their design as a greenhouse fabric, but while they're still providing protection. And obviously they give huge benefits. They allow farmers to extend the seasons that their crops are working on, provide a controlled environment, so uh, stopping insects, getting pests and stuff. So that they are a very useful product, but they can have an impact if they're used beyond their life. When the plastic starts to degrade, then they will be easily damaged and eventually will end up polluting in the environment.
No. So very rightly you mentioned about how regulations and policies and licensing, it's very important from national to international cooperation. I remember at Earth Day we have these small booklets for farmers. It's called Farmers for the Earth, and then we have for soil, and then water, irrigation, and seeds and organic things. But with that comes, that is one part of the solution we are presenting to farmers. But unless and until it comes back from the upside, like this is what you can do, this is what is available in the market, I think that is going to make a huge change. And what we all have to remember is, as you mentioned, and I quote, plastic remains intact. I mean, if we are able to just realize that we will not be here, but that plastic that we throw today or we use in our agriculture practices, or we get the food and packaging, it will stay. Even our generations will see that packaging. So that now the conversation comes to my third and the final question as well. What are these challenges that you might have faced or you might have experienced or seen with farmers or these food communities in agriculture practices or food processing that the plastic poses right now? It's like everywhere. And do we have some innovative solutions as of now, which we should really move towards a sustainable future, and apart from the regulations and policy, of course?
Yes, indeed. I think the unique thing about plastics used in agricultural production, so the mulching films, greenhouse films, irrigation, is that at their end of life, they end up as large quantities in rural environments away from the infrastructure associated with waste management in cities. Um, they are the responsibility of a farmer, so it's generally working by himself or with only a few supports. So managing that waste is difficult, and it's very easy for that waste to end up either being openly burnt or just dumped in the countryside, or dumped inappropriately on a dump site. So, one of the things that is being explored now and has proved to be effective is extended producer responsibility. And this is where the producers of the products that put them on the market provide a mechanism for the farmers to be able to return their wastes. And it's important that that mechanism gives the minimum of barriers to the farmers for compliance. So, it should be largely free of charge. So, the farmers, the cost of the end of life management will be incorporated in the original purchase price of the products, so that when it comes to disposal, the farmer doesn't have to worry about spending money on its disposal. It's already a service that's provided free.
Nice.
And the most, I think some of the most effective schemes are those that provide a one-stop shop. So rather than a farmer having to talk to a scheme for the collection of his irrigation tubes and a separate
Yeah.
collection scheme for the greenhouse films and for the mulching films, etc., there is just one organization that he deals with for the collection of all his plastics waste. So, as I said, barriers should be minimum. It should be easy to use. And so that makes it easy for the farmer to comply. But in addition to that, from the regulations, there should also be controls and penalties if farmers are not complying. So there's a carrot and a stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so uh, through that sort of mechanism, and making that mechanism mandatory, so it has to have a legally binding nature. So um, manufacturers of these products should be obliged through national legislation to provide this sort of service. And there are good examples around the world of where this is done. France has a very good scheme called Adivalor. It's very well developed in Europe. Much of it is voluntary, it's not all mandatory, but I believe it is beginning to change in that direction. Brazil has a fantastic scheme for its empty pesticide containers, which is legally mandated. So farmers are obliged to use it and manufacturers are obliged to provide this service. And they have a collection rate, something like 94% of all pesticide containers that enter
Wow.
the Brazilian market are collected and are recycled. And in fact, they're
Right.
recycled mostly back into new pesticide containers. So it's a kind of circular solution. So those are examples of where it is done well, addressing the challenges. So I think the challenges can be addressed at that end when the materials become waste, but also in terms of the licensing of the products to ensure that the products that come onto the market are suitable for use. So there aren't any thin mulching films on the market. All the mulching films already have the holes in the plastic, so that when the farmers are
Hmm.
putting it on the field, they're not creating small
Yeah.
discs of plastic that are just dumped in the field.
Yeah.
These sorts of things.
That's wonderful. I think we all learn from each other, all these countries who have been doing wonderful work, because food agriculture is everywhere. It's one of the common thing that we have, apart from the plastic pollution nowadays, which is common everywhere. So it has been wonderful, Mr. Richard, to have you in this podcast. It was indeed very informative and insightful. Thank you so much for joining.
Okay, thank you, and goodbye to you too.
And that's where we wrap the podcast. And for the audience, until next time, keep it green, keep it clean, and remember, every day is Earth Day.